So earlier this week, Rasul Douglas was traded to the Buffalo Bills, and today he had his first press conference in Buffalo with the Buffalo Bills, and he basically explained exactly how everything went down, how the Packers let him know that he was traded. So I want to get into that, share some of that, and sort of how the Packers decided to move on from Rasul. And if you guys are new here, I put out Packers content almost every day, so feel free to subscribe to stay up to date with all Packers news, updates, all that kind of stuff. So here we have from Elena Getzenberg, who says this: Rasul Douglas said that he found out that he was being traded somewhere in the 3 p.m. hour on Tuesday. He said that Packers GM Brian Gutekunst called him and said they were trading him, and Douglas hung up on him because he didn't believe him. Douglas said this: Brian Gutekunst called me at first. I thought it was like a joke because he wasn't saying too much. He was just like, we're trading you. And then the conversation was just over. I just hung up. So at first, Rasul didn't seem to think it was real, I guess because Gutekunst just said, we're trading you. Then he goes on here: then Packers president Mark Murphy called to thank him for everything, and he realized it was real. Douglas said that he and Aaron Jones had a moment when they found out the news and cried together. He said leaving was emotional. So it's sad to see, one of these players that's been here in Green Bay for a few years, in Rasul Douglas, a guy the Packers bring in from the practice squad. He has that crazy game-clinching interception against the Cardinals, and I think all of us Packers fans have really grown fond of, sort of what he's done here in Green Bay, and especially this season, he seemed to have, really taken his play to another level. And even after Sunday's loss to the Minnesota Vikings, he was one of the guys who reportedly all these players were coming to and trying to get some advice from, and he was sort of explaining things. And there's no doubt he was one of the key leaders, not only on this defense, but on this Packers team, a guy that I think many of these young guys looked up to. And so it's really sad to have a guy like him go and leave this team. And it's like, there's of course been debate this week. Was it a good move? Was it a bad move? And on the one hand, I think just looking from the outside in, not really taking into account like the leadership qualities or the locker room aspect, those kinds of things, I think it makes sense for a young Packers team that is, not playing well right now. Brian Gutekunst wants to get future draft capital. Rasul Douglas is, 28. I think he'll be 29 to start next season, I believe, somewhere around there. And he has one more year left on his contract before he got traded from the Packers. And so my guess is that Gutekunst maybe wasn't planning on signing him back after that next season, wanted to free up cap space and move up to the third round, get another young guy, and maybe allow a player like Carrington Valentine to potentially come in here and get more reps and maybe build that experience. Maybe he wants him to become some kind of leader. And so it sort of goes, back and forth to, how GMs let these players know that they're traded. And I imagine being a GM is a tough task just because it is your job to make moves to try to make your team better. And I do believe that Brian Gutekunst, I honestly think that obviously with him being the GM, with his success tied to the success of the Packers, I don't think there's a doubt in my mind that Gutekunst is trying to do what he thinks is best to build a winning team here in Green Bay for the next few years, not just looking at this season. And it seems like GMs have a different way of going about things. I was looking at a interview from Leonard Williams, who just got traded to the Seattle Seahawks, and he explains how he was approached by his GM, saying that there were a few teams that were reaching out to them, that he wasn't shopping Leonard Williams, but that a few competitive teams on the winning side were reaching out to him about, wanting to make a playoff push and potentially wanting Leonard Williams. And the GM seemed, from the way that Leonard Williams explained it, to give him the option and sort of decide, does he want to leave the Giants? And I saw David Bakhtiari responded to that and said like he liked the way that GM handled things. And so it has to be tough if you're a GM, the way that you go about these things, because on the one hand, it's cool that, he went to the player and said, hey, this is what's coming in. Let me know what you think. But at the same time, I would imagine that GMs can't always come to a player every time, a player gets inquired about. Because I would imagine that GMs are discussing with other GMs a lot about potential trades. And I think that if you were to let a player know every time someone was interested, I think that could cause even more issues in a locker room than if you just, come out in the end when you make a trade and say, hey, you're traded. But at the same time, I don't know what the answer is here. I don't know if maybe the Packers should have done more as they, sort of let Rasul Douglas go out the door. But it is tough for a team to lose, a high character guy, a leader in the locker room in Rasul Douglas. And I think it just sort of shows the state the Packers are in right now. The fact that we are in a rebuild, that Gutekunst is trying to load up on draft capital for the future. And just as we saw in this offseason, getting rid of old veterans like Lazard, like Randall Cobb, like Mercedes Lewis, Robert Tonyan. It seems like that streak is continuing right now with Brian Gutekunst recognizing that the Packers don't seem to have enough right now to compete for a Super Bowl or to compete in the playoffs at this time. And so I think in his mind, he's trying to do what he thinks is best to, build for the future, get tons of draft capital. And, on the one hand, as I said, I understand it. I understand the value in trading Rasul, saving money, getting a draft pick. But it does hurt to lose a guy who was viewed in the locker room as a very, a great leader, a guy that people respected, and it's tough to see it happen. And then I'm going to finish it off here and take a look here at some quotes from Aaron Jones on Rasul Douglas leaving. And it's tough because you can see just how much these guys care for each other and, they spend so much time together in the locker room. And let me just read this here from Aaron Jones. And it says here, "It hurt. That's my guy. I didn't know too many guys before I got here, or even going literally through the combine process getting into the league. And I met Sewell during that time training. I even told him, I want to say it was 2019 when we were playing him here. I told him, hey, bro, you need to be here. This is the perfect place for you. Then it ended up working. It came full circle. He ended up here. I knew what kind of player we were getting because I trained to him. I worked with him when both of us didn't think we'd be in the league. So just having that connection, knowing there's somebody just like you, I feel like just like me, in terms of the way we think, the way we see things on the field. So to lose one of your brothers, a close friend, near best friend, it's tough, but I got to come down here. He was still in the facility, and I got to talk to him. We got to have that moment and just let him know I'm proud of him because it was going so many different ways for him. I was like, hey, I don't know what happened before you got here, you moving teams and things like that, but I know when you got here, you handled business. I'm sure you were like that in every other place, but when you got here, you handled business. It's all worked out for you. I'm proud of you. I just let him know I was proud of him." So I think, we're getting a look at the tough reality of the NFL, the fact that it is a business, that these GMs have to, cut players, release players, do all these things, and it's unfortunate because even watching the press conference in Buffalo with Rasul, you could tell that he still seemed somewhat sad to me. Like you could tell that he just left his home, the people he's close to, and of course he's in a new area, and I hope he's successful. I'll be rooting for the Bills for Rasul to have some success in the playoffs this season because he seems to be a great team player, a great guy, and I just hope he has a lot of success with Buffalo. It was great to have him in Green Bay, and it, of course, is very sad to see him go. But that's it for this one. If you want more Packers content, feel free to subscribe, turn on the post notifications so you never miss any Packers news, any Packers content.